Title: The Gallows of Tombstone. The dust never settled in Tombstone. It swirled through the narrow streets, scraping against the wooden planks, clinging to the stone buildings like a constant reminder that life out here was hard. Hard like the land, hard like the people. At dawn, it would claim another life. They were hanging her. The night was darker than it should have been, the kind of darkness that swallowed up everything but the howl of the wind and the faintest stir of the earth beneath it. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Jake Morrison sat in his chair by the fire, nursing a bottle of whiskey that had long lost its warmth. The wood crackled and groaned in the hearth, as if the house itself was trying to hold on to something, trying to keep from slipping into the cold night outside. He had been waiting for news, for something to give him a reason to move. But his fingers itched for a fight, for action, for anything that would make the weight on his chest feel lighter. That's when the door burst open, slamming against the wall with a violence that could only come from desperation. A man staggered inside, half collapsing against the doorframe. His face was pale, like he'd seen too many things, and his horse, a gray that looked more dead than alive, was already halfway through the threshold of its last breath. The man's hands trembled as he extended a crumpled letter to Jake, his breath shallow, his eyes wide with fear. Jake took the letter, but he didn't open it yet. He didn't need to. The messenger's look told him everything he needed to know. "They're hanging her," the man gasped, his voice raw, like it had been torn from him. "Dawn, 6 hours from now." Jake's stomach tightened. He could feel it in the pit of his gut, a sickening churn that made the whiskey feel heavier in his hand. "Who?" Jake asked, though he already knew. It had to be her. "Rebecca Martinez," the man whispered, the name catching in the wind like it was something that shouldn't have been spoken. "Guilty of murder. Judge Morrison signed the death warrant." 3 hours ago. Jake's hand froze around the letter. His fingers, usually steady, trembled as he unfolded the paper. It was a piece of history, a piece of her history, a sentence that meant everything and nothing at the same time. Rebecca, guilty of murder. A woman who had spent her life doing nothing but good for others. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Jake's voice was hoarse when he spoke, though his mind was still trying to catch up with the words on the page. What evidence did they have? The messenger looked down, shifting on his feet like he could feel the weight of it too. They found her, standing over Sheriff Coleman's body. Gun in hand. Half the town saw it. She won't deny it. Says she had no choice. The room felt colder now. Jake's mind was racing, trying to piece together the impossible. Rebecca had never hurt anyone. The kindest soul in 3 counties. She couldn't have done this. Jake's gaze lifted to the window. The moon hung low in the sky, a thin sliver of silver against the darkened world. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet you get when everything is about to change. "I'll go," Jake said, his voice sharp and final. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. There was no other choice now. He had 6 hours to ride 40 miles, to cross Apache territory and face down a town that had already made up its mind. The messenger shook his head, fear still clinging to his words. "Jake, you don't understand. That trail's crawling with Apaches. They killed 3 men just last week. No one in their right mind would ride out there now, not for 100 miles. Jake strapped on his gun belt, the leather heavy against his waist, like it was a piece of his soul, worn and weathered. The gun was a part of him, just like the ride would be. "Rebecca didn't kill Coleman," Jake said, the words sounding more like a promise than a statement. "And I'm not letting them hang an innocent woman." The messenger grabbed his arm, his fingers digging into Jake's skin. "Even if you make it to town alive, what then? You think Sheriff Williams is just going to hand her over? Not after what happened between you two." Jake pulled free, his jaw set in determination. "I'll figure that out when I get there." The messenger's eyes flickered with doubt, but there was nothing more to be said. Jake was already at the door, heading for the stable where his horse, Thunder, waited. The cabin door slammed shut behind him, and Jake mounted his horse in one fluid motion, the weight of the coming hours pressing down on his chest. The leather creaked beneath him, and Thunder snorted, shaking his head like he understood the urgency of the ride ahead. The town of Tombstone was a long ride, and the trail would be rougher than anything Jake had ridden before. But Rebecca's life hung in the balance now, and there was no turning back. As Jake kicked Thunder into a gallop, his mind went back to the last time he saw her. Her laughter, her smile, the way she held the children at the church social just 3 weeks ago. How could all have gone so wrong? His heart pounded against his chest, and the wind carried dust and regret through the open door. The desert stretched out before Jake like an endless sea of dust and heat. The air was thick, suffocating, and every mile seemed to carry a heavier burden. The weight of his promise to Rebecca pressed down on him like the saddle on his back, but the truth was heavier than the ride. He couldn't stop thinking about the message the messenger had delivered. Rebecca standing over Sheriff Coleman's body, the gun still smoking in her hand. The further Jake rode, the more the darkness began to take shape, the shadows of his doubt creeping in like the shadows of the mountains ahead. Rebecca had never been a woman who could hurt anyone, let alone kill a man. But the evidence was clear, or so they said. The horse's hooves struck the ground in steady rhythm as Thunder carried him deeper into the desert, his breath puffing through the dry night air. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour felt like a day. Jake's mind churned with unanswered questions. What had really happened that night? Why would Rebecca, the kind-hearted woman who spent her days nursing the sick and feeding the hungry, kill the sheriff? It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Then the answer hit him like a bullet. Rebecca wasn't just innocent. She was protecting someone. But who? She had never hesitated to help anyone in need. But who could be worth taking the fall for? Who could be worth dying for? Jake's grip tightened on the reins. His heart quickened, and the wind seemed to pick up, stinging his face like 1,000 little needles. There was something in the air tonight, something wrong. It was the kind of night when the past and the present collided, and the air was heavy with the weight of secrets. He thought about the night he and Rebecca had shared under the stars, their voices quiet, the world around them still. She had spoken of her childhood, of her family in Mexico, and the things she had endured in her past. But she had never spoken about the darkness lurking in the corners of her world. Had she been hiding something? Had she always been carrying a secret? Jake's thoughts wandered back to the sheriff. Coleman had been a known drunk, a man who used his badge to get what he wanted, and what he wanted was Rebecca. She had told him so, laughing it off with a bitter smile that made Jake's stomach twist. No one had ever stood up to the sheriff before. Not until Rebecca. And that was it. Jake understood now. The sheriff had been a threat, a danger. And when Rebecca had refused his advances, when she had stood up for herself, he had come after her. But it wasn't just about the sheriff's pride. It was about something much darker. Something Rebecca would never have told him. The truth was that Rebecca had been defending herself, just as Doc Henderson had likely been doing when Coleman drew on him that night. But what Jake hadn't known, what he couldn't have known, was that Coleman's death wasn't her doing. It was Doc's. Rebecca had never meant to kill anyone. She had only meant to protect herself from a man who had been threatening her. And when she had gone to confront him, she had hoped that Doc would be able to talk some sense into the sheriff. But she didn't know how drunk Coleman was or how dangerous the situation had become. What happened next was no accident. Doc Henderson, the town's only doctor, the man who had delivered Rebecca, who had cared for her all these years, had been forced to take the sheriff's gun from his hands. The gun had gone off. It wasn't Rebecca's fault. It wasn't hers to carry. But now, she was going to hang for it. Jake's chest tightened. The thought of her dying for something she hadn't done, of her innocent face hanging from a rope, twisted his insides. He could feel the anger boiling in his veins, like fire running through his blood. It didn't matter what it cost him. He would find the truth. He would save her. Thunder's hooves echoed through the night, the only sound keeping Jake tethered to the present, reminding him that time was running out. He was getting closer to Tombstone, closer to the truth. But the truth was a dangerous thing in this town. It could get you killed. As the town's outline appeared in the distance, shrouded in the early morning mist, Jake's thoughts grew darker. He didn't know if he could trust Doc Henderson anymore. Not after everything. Not after what he had learned about the sheriff's hold over him. Doc had been the one to shoot Coleman, not Rebecca. And now he was the one who had let her take the fall, unwilling to step forward and admit his own guilt. Jake's heart broke at the thought. Doc had been Rebecca's protector, her friend, and now he was the one standing in the way of her freedom. How could he let her sacrifice her life for him? But there was no time to dwell on that now. He was almost there. He had to make it to her before the hangman did. The clock was ticking. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the land. The first rays of light touched the earth, but they couldn't break through the darkness in Jake's heart. He had a plan, but he wasn't sure if it would be enough. Thunder slowed, his breath coming in labored gasps. The horse was tired, worn out from the long ride, but Jake urged him on. They had to make it to the jail. They had to get to Rebecca before it was too late. And as the town's dusty streets came into view, Jake had one thought on his mind. I'll be damned if I let her hang for something she didn't do. The sun hadn't fully risen when Jake reached the outskirts of Tombstone, but the first stirrings of the morning light were already painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. The town was quiet, too quiet. The distant sound of the church bell, tolling the early hour, was the only sound that reminded Jake of the time. He didn't have much left. Thunder's hooves dug into the dirt, his tired legs stumbling beneath him as they approached the town's edge. Dust clung to the horse's coat, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. But it was nothing compared to the burning in Jake's chest, the gnawing feeling of helplessness that had only grown since the messenger's words had hit him like a bullet. He was here. Tombstone was just ahead. But the town was crawling with people who didn't want to see justice, who would rather turn a blind eye to the truth than see their world come undone. Jake could feel it in the air. This wasn't just about saving Rebecca anymore. It was about something bigger, a fight for what was right, for truth, and for the kind of courage that didn't cower in the face of corruption. The first sign of trouble came when Jake spotted the silhouette of a man up ahead. He could see the outline of the sheriff's deputy, leaning against the post, a lazy, disinterested look on his face as he watched the town stir. Jake kept his distance, his hand hovering near the handle of his revolver. But something didn't feel right. The deputy was too still, too silent. Jake's instinct screamed at him, but it was too late. "Jake Morrison," the deputy called out, his voice loud enough to echo across the street. "Sheriff Williams wants to see you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had known it was coming. He just hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "I'm not in the mood for company," Jake called back, his voice low but firm. The deputy's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. It wasn't the first time he'd heard someone talk back to him, but it was the first time someone had dared to walk into Tombstone with a death sentence hanging over their head and a heart full of defiance. "You don't have much choice in the matter," the deputy said, stepping forward. "You're wanted by the sheriff. Best come along quietly, or we'll make it harder for you." Jake's hand was already on the grip of his revolver, the weight of it familiar, comforting. He wasn't here for a fight. He was here to save the woman he loved. But there was no way he could just walk into the sheriff's hands. "Not today, friend," Jake said, and with that, he spurred Thunder into action, the horse lurching forward as Jake pulled his revolver free. He didn't fire yet. He wasn't a killer, not unless he had no choice. But the deputy wasn't about to let him leave without a fight. The man's hand shot to his own gun, but Jake was faster. A shot rang out, the crack of the revolver echoing through the street, and the deputy crumpled to the dirt, his gun skittering across the ground. Jake didn't waste a moment. He didn't have time to see if the man was dead. He couldn't afford the delay. He kicked Thunder into a gallop, his heart pounding as they raced down the street. He was getting closer to the jail now. The town was waking up, and there was no way to avoid the eyes of the people. No way to sneak into the shadows. The whole town was about to see what he was willing to risk for Rebecca. As Jake rounded the corner of the main street, he caught sight of the jailhouse in the distance. It was a squat, ugly building, its wooden walls weathered from years of neglect, its single window barred like the heart of a man trapped in his own sins. He didn't need to look up to know what was waiting inside. He knew what they were going to do to her. He urged Thunder forward, riding hard, the sound of their hooves like thunder rolling across the earth. They were close now, too close for anyone to stop him. He just had to make it to the jail before they did. The town square was empty for the moment, save for a few men lounging against buildings, chatting over coffee. Jake could feel their eyes follow him, their gazes heavy with judgment, but he didn't care. His only concern was the woman in that jail. A shout rang out from behind him, and Jake turned just in time to see the deputy's partner emerge from the alley, his rifle aimed straight at Jake's chest. But Jake didn't hesitate. He fired first, the shot knocking the rifle from the man's hands, sending him sprawling backward. There was no time for mercy. Not when Rebecca's life hung in the balance. With a hard turn, Jake headed straight for the jailhouse, hoping against hope that he would be able to find a way in. As he approached the iron gates of the sheriff's prison, the sound of galloping horses filled the air, and Jake's heart sank. He didn't know how many of them were coming, but he could hear the beat of hooves growing louder, more men on the hunt for him. But Jake was already at the door. He didn't have time to run anymore. He had already come too far. He jumped from his horse, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. He was almost there, but he had to act quickly. The truth had to come out, and he was going to make sure it did. Jake's breath came in sharp gasps as he pushed through the narrow alleyways of Tombstone, his boots pounding the dust-streaked streets. Behind him, the sounds of the pursuit grew louder. Galloping hooves, shouting voices, the scrape of a rifle being cocked. He didn't have much time. The clock was ticking, and every second felt like an eternity. He could see the jailhouse up ahead, looming like a dark sentinel at the end of the street. His heart raced as he pulled the last corner, his fingers brushing the grip of his revolver. He had no plan other than to get inside, find Rebecca, and get her out before it was too late. But the moment he stepped into the open, his instinct screamed that something was wrong. A shadow moved among the rocks near the jail. The hairs on the back of Jake's neck stood up as he noticed the horses tethered behind Eagle Rock, the large boulder formation just ahead. The trap had been set, and he had walked right into it. Jake's mind raced. How could they have known he was coming? The only person who had seen him leave had been the messenger, and he had been as desperate as Jake was to save Rebecca. So how had they prepared for him? The men from the sheriff's posse were already circling, closing in on him from all directions. He could hear their boots crunching against the dirt, the sound of rifles being loaded. He was surrounded. The only thing he could do was keep moving, keep fighting, and hope he could make it to the jail in time. But the world seemed to close in around him. The rocks seemed to rise like walls, blocking any chance of escape. He stopped at the edge of the formation, his eyes scanning the landscape for a way out. The dried desert air seemed to choke him, the weight of the guns behind him pressing against his back. He was trapped, and he knew it. Jake Morrison, a voice called from the rocks. It was Bill Crenshaw, one of Sheriff Williams's deputies. "We know you're out there. Come forward with your hands up, and nobody has to get hurt." Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he slowly pulled his revolver from its holster. His eyes darted between the rocks and the shadows, searching for an escape. But there was no way out. "You're wasting your time, Crenshaw," Jake called back, his voice low and steady. "I'm not going anywhere." Crenshaw chuckled darkly. "You never were the smartest man, Jake. You always did like to run head first into trouble. But this time, it's not just you we're after. We've got her too." Jake's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what Crenshaw meant. They were talking about Rebecca. She was still in that jail, and they were going to hang her whether he was there or not. "You think you can stop us?" Crenshaw sneered. "You think you could take on all of us?" Jake's grip tightened on his gun. He didn't care about the odds. He didn't care about the men behind him, the guns aimed at his back. He cared about one thing, getting to Rebecca. His mind flashed back to her face, to the way she had looked at him the last time they had been together. The desperation in her eyes, the love they had shared, the promise he had made to her. He wasn't going to let them take her. Not like this. Not when he still had a chance to save her. Crenshaw's voice cut through his thoughts. "You've got one choice, Morrison. You come out, and we'll make it quick. Or we come to you, and it's going to get real messy." Jake didn't hesitate. He didn't have time for their games. He raised his revolver, aiming it toward the first figure he saw moving behind the rocks. His shot rang out, sharp and quick, and the man dropped to the ground with a grunt. But the sound of gunfire only spurred the others into action. More shots rang out, filling the air with a deafening roar of violence. Jake ducked behind the cover of a large boulder, his heart hammering in his chest as he reloaded his revolver. The battle had begun. The men on the other side were closing in, moving with a speed and precision that betrayed their training. They weren't just hired guns. They were soldiers, and they were here for a reason, to stop him. But Jake wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when Rebecca's life was at stake. He glanced at the horizon, looking for any sign of help. But there was nothing, just the endless stretch of desert, the rocks, and the sound of his heart pounding in his ears. He was alone. Another shot rang out, and this time Jake felt the sting of the bullet graze his shoulder. He gritted his teeth and pressed on, knowing that every second counted. He had to reach the jail. He had to get inside and save Rebecca before it was too late. As he moved closer to the entrance of a jail, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance, and Jake's heart skipped a beat. He knew what that sound meant. More men were coming. More of Williams's posse. But he didn't have time to worry about that now. He was almost there. He just needed to make it inside. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, the glint of something shiny in the distance. Another figure. Someone was coming. For a brief moment, Jake allowed himself to hope. Maybe it was someone who could help. But then the figure raised a rifle, and everything went cold again. Jake's mind raced, calculating his next move, but before he could make a decision, the sound of a horse's heavy hooves thundered toward him from behind. He spun around just as the rider reached him, his revolver aimed straight at Jake's chest. The man's face was shadowed, but Jake recognized him instantly. It was Doc Henderson. The sun had barely broken the horizon when Jake caught sight of Doc Henderson riding toward him. The sight of the old doctor's horse, the familiar paint mare with the white markings, sent a chill down Jake's spine. It wasn't just the unexpected arrival of Doc that unsettled him. It was the feeling that something was wrong. Doc should have been helping Rebecca, not riding with the sheriff's men. The old doctor, hunched and weathered from years of hard living, rode straight into Jake's path. His face was drawn tight, a look of shame and regret written deep in the lines of his brow. But it wasn't the Doc Jake knew, the man who had delivered Rebecca, who had cared for her since she was a child. Doc, Jake called, his voice hoarse with a mix of disbelief and anger. What the hell are you doing here? The doctor didn't answer right away. He simply dismounted, his movements slow, deliberate. He reached into his coat and pulled out a letter. Jake recognized it immediately as the same death warrant that had been given to Rebecca. "You're too late, Jake," Doc said quietly, his voice thick with guilt. "It's over. She's going to hang." Jake felt the ground shift beneath him. "No, you don't get to say that. Not when you know what happened." Doc looked down at the letter in his hand, his eyes clouded with regret. "I never wanted this for her. But sometimes people make choices that can't be undone." Jake took a step forward, his hands shaking with fury. "You killed Coleman, didn't you?" His voice was low, but the accusation hung in the air like a heavy stone. The doctor's gaze met Jake's, but there was no denial in his eyes, only a quiet acceptance. "I didn't mean to. You have to understand, Jake. I tried to stop him, but he was out of his mind with rage. We pulled a gun on her. I had no choice. He would have killed her." Jake's chest tightened, the weight of the words crashing into him. "You did it to protect her," Jake said quietly. "But why didn't you tell the truth? Why let her take the fall?" Doc's shoulders sagged, the weight of years of silence settling into the folds of his old coat. "Because I'm old, Jake. I'm 73 years old. I've lived my life. Rebecca, she's got her whole life ahead of her. She's worth more than I am. I couldn't let her throw it away for something she didn't do." Jake's mind spun, piecing together the puzzle he had spent hours, no days, try to figure out. The pieces had always been there, just out of reach. Doc had been protecting her, just like she had always protected others. But now it was too late. The truth was buried beneath layers of lies, corruption, and betrayal. "Doc, you've got to tell them the truth," Jake said urgently. "You can't let her die for something you did." The old man's eyes closed, and he let out a long, ragged breath. "It's too late for that now," he whispered. "Williams has already got his story. He's not going to stop until Rebecca's dead." Jake turned, his mind racing. He had been close, so close. But now, the walls were closing in on him. He didn't have much time. The execution was scheduled for dawn, and the hangman wouldn't wait for anyone, not even for the truth. "I'll stop him," Jake said, his voice firm. "I'll make sure she doesn't hang." Doc grabbed his arm, his grip strong for an old man. "Jake, you don't understand. The sheriff won't stop. You think he's going to let Rebecca live after what she said? He's already blackmailing her. He's got the whole town in his pocket. There's nothing you can do." Jake's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He had come this far, through dust and bullets, through lies and betrayal. He couldn't stop now. "You don't know me very well, Doc," Jake said, his eyes flashing with determination. "I didn't come all this way to let her die." There was no more time for words. Jake had to move, and fast. He turned to leave, but as he did, the sound of horses' hooves echoed through the desert air. The men were closing in. William's men. They were getting closer, and Jake knew he was running out of time. The sound of footsteps behind him made him spin around. Doc stood there, his face a mix of regret and resolve. "You're right," Doc said quietly. "It's time to set things right." Jake looked at him, hope flickering in his chest. Doc was going to help him. The truth was out now, and with it, Jake knew they had one last chance. Doc pulled something from his coat pocket, a small, folded piece of paper, and handed it to Jake. "This is what you need," he said. "It'll get you into the jail. It's the evidence you need to prove Rebecca's innocence." Jake's hand trembled as he took the paper. His eyes scanned the words, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself a small breath of relief. The truth was in his hands now. All he had to do was get to Rebecca and get her out before it was too late. Doc reached for Jake's hand and squeezed it firmly. "You make sure she knows that I'm sorry," he said. "Make sure she knows she's not alone." Jake nodded, his resolve hardening. "I will. I'll make sure of it." The time had come. The truth had set them free. Now, it was up to Jake to make sure it wouldn't be too late. Jake mounted thunder once more, feeling the familiar weight of the saddle beneath him, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves pounding against the earth beneath him. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale light over the town of Tombstone. And for the first time in hours, Jake felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. The truth was in his hands now, and nothing, not even Sheriff Williams, could stop him from saving Rebecca.